I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight for our presentation on the Anxiety Toolbox. Especially like to welcome one of our trustees here, Kim McKinley, who is a great supporter of these workshops and is actually on the planning committee. We'd also like to thank GECPIC, that's the Greater Essex County Parent Involvement Committee, for funding these seminars. Most people do not realize their anxiety for what it is, and instead think there is something wrong with them. Some people are preoccupied with the symptoms of anxiety, such as stomach aches, increased heart rate, shortness of breath, etc. Others think they are weird, weak, or even going crazy. Unfortunately, these thoughts only make people even more anxious and self-conscious. Tonight, we're going to learn about understanding and recognizing anxiety so that we can learn to manage it successfully. Please help me in welcoming Glenda McGarrigle, clinical therapist at Maryville within the Brief Service Program, working with individuals and families struggling with mental health issues, and Morana Sheehan, clinical therapist at Maryville with the Community Capacity Program and Brief Services, working with individuals and families struggling with mental health issues.
So as he was going over some of the symptoms of anxiety, I was going check, check, check. So just to start off, we thought we would just show some, for parents and for teens as well, some common signs of anxiety. This is not, for sure, not an exhaustive list of examples, but just some things we thought would be helpful to see. Does any of this sound familiar? Possibly excessive shyness, avoiding social situations, for example, the mall, ordering their food in restaurants, asking for assistance in stores, or talking on the phone, or even just simply answering the door. Could be constant worries about everything and anything. Frequent stomach aches and or headaches, and or experiencing sudden or frequent panic attacks.
So as a parent of an anxious child, you're not alone. Here are a few things you need to know about anxiety. Anxiety is the most common mental health concern for children and adults. Canadian statistics reveal that it affects 10 to 12% of children and teens. If left untreated, anxiety can lead to other problems later in life, such as depression, missed opportunities in education and careers, broken relationships, increased substance abuse, and an overall decreased quality in life. Parents of anxious teens are often confused about what to do, as well as feeling frustrated and overwhelmed. But there is good news. Anxiety can be successfully managed.
So in a very basic and general way, what we do need to know and what your teen needs to know about anxiety is, first and foremost, it is normal. It's normal and it's absolutely necessary for survival. I often use some very simple examples when I'm introducing that concept. I talk about, when you're about to cross the road, what kind of things do you do? Well, I look both ways. And so why do you do that? Well, to keep myself safe and make sure I don't get hit by a car. And that's one of the good anxieties we have because we want to feel that anxiety so we can make those healthy choices. The other thing I might use with teens is we talk about, well, why do you study? Why do you look at your notes before a test? Because they feel anxious because they want to do well, they want to get certain grades, they want to pass. Those are all examples of healthy anxiety and normative kind of anxieties. And the other thing we teach is that anxiety is not dangerous. It doesn't feel good, and it can be incredibly overwhelming at times, but it's absolutely not dangerous. The other thing we talk about is that anxiety is adaptive. It's the fight, or freeze response. And I thought I'd let Glenda talk a little bit about that. She does a wonderful job at kind of giving that example.
So anxiety has been part of the human brain dating way back to the cavemen, when the woolly mammoth was on the loose, or at least the caveman thought he heard the wild beast approaching. With this danger, or perceived danger, the caveman's brain released two chemicals, cortisol and adrenaline, which caused his heart to beat faster, his hands to become clammy, his body to tremble and feel tense and jittery. All this gave him the energy to run like heck, or fight bravely, or freeze, thinking that might avoid the danger. Well, us modern folks have the very same brain function, that fight, flight, or freeze response, which gives us those physical feelings when we are either in real danger or we think danger might be right around the corner. So anxiety becomes a problem when our body reacts in the absence of real danger. This is what we call the Anxiety Triad, and we use it in order to understand our worried teens a little better. It illustrates how their worried thinking produces their anxious feelings that affects their behavior. For example, we know that most anxious teens are highly sensitive, pretty creative, and most of the time hypervigilant, and are wired up to be just good worriers. And so your teen may say something like this as they come in the door. I had the worst day. As I walked into French class, I tripped. I could tell everybody was going to laugh. I don't know what it's going to be like at school tomorrow. Maybe I don't feel like going to school tomorrow. Ugh. And what if they make fun of me? Well, these worried thoughts fuel the physical arousal, which produces that stomach upset, that feeling of nausea, trembling, and difficulty breathing, which then may cause her to retreat to her room and not want to do anything with anyone that evening. So that's how the thoughts really do drive the physical arousal, that physical feelings, which then impact the child's behavior. And in anxiety, the behavior is always avoid and escape.
So often to help illustrate that, in the same session we'll introduce the Anxiety Triad, and then we'll talk about this example called the noise at the window, which looks at specific examples of your thoughts and your feelings, and it looks at a situation where a child or a teen is in bed at night, and they're in bed and they hear a noise at their window. The one person automatic thought is, oh my gosh, it's a burglar, and you can see how they're automatically going to be scared, and usually when you're scared, you're also going to have an increased heart rate. You might have rapid breathing. You'll have a really hard time calming down at that point. And so you probably have times in your lives too where you felt that heart rate and it's really hard to kind of go back to sleep at that point. Whereas the other person, the example would be that they say to themselves, oh, it's just the trees against the window, and dad didn't trim those trees like mom said he should. So those kind of things would be what a teen might think of, and you can automatically see that increases their calm feelings. So that just helps illustrate the function of the Anxiety Triad, which in general is what we call the fuel for anxiety. That's what keeps it going.
So if anxiety is normal and adaptive, you must be wondering, well, when does anxiety become a real problem? It becomes a real problem when it causes considerable distress or interferes in everyday life. When your child stops doing the things that he or she used to enjoy, and she's maybe staying in her room, staying in the house a lot more. Examples could include things like having an upset stomach every time there's an important test or presentation, refusing, not wanting to go to school, or he or she may call you up as soon as she gets there, or maybe just a little while afterwards with the excuse or those physical feelings of being upset. We find that teens with anxiety often scream at their family, having meltdowns when something big is happening or something that they feel uncomfortable with. Parents, family are always the ones that get the consequences of their anxiety. It looks like the kids are oppositional or being uncooperative, but a lot of times it's the anxiety that's really bothering them, and they will have those kinds of meltdowns. Other things you might see are the kids not wanting to participate in unfamiliar activities such as school field trips or other types of social gatherings. We also find that anxious teens also expect perfection. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And then they have meltdowns when they can't achieve it. We find that perfectionism can crop up in their schoolwork, of course, but also in things like their athletics and their personal appearance. They're not happy with the way they look. They sometimes even refuse to go to school because things just aren't right. So we encourage kids and their parents to understand that they need to do their own personal best but we tell them that no one achieves perfection. And we encourage parents to tell the kids that they need to find balance and other interests in their life to make that balance happen for them.
So it goes without saying that anxiety can definitely affect the whole family. Behaviors of anxious teens often seem unreasonable, as Glenda was mentioning. These teens may often appear to be stubborn or labeled as stubborn, maybe labeled as difficult or too sensitive. It's very important to understand that these behaviors are definitely that response to that perceived threat, which Glenda talked about, that fight, flight, or freeze response. And also then understanding that triad, remembering the fuel, the thoughts and the feelings, and then the effect on the behavior. The key point, of course, is when we're encouraging our teen to face their fears, remember that you're actually asking them to fight against an instinctual response to danger. So you will get that initial reaction, that initial kind of like, sort of like Glenda was saying, that opposition, and that's to be expected, and we see it often. So I think it's just important to remind ourselves of that potential capacity to happen.
So we've put together just a few toolbox strategies to manage anxiety. They're going to be learning to relax, challenging the scary thoughts, and facing your fears. So we're going to talk about each one of these.
So learning to relax is one of the first strategy actually that we chose to present. We chose 2 strategies from that to talk about tonight, but as I just wanted to make note of, there are plenty of strategies out there that can help you relax. It's just really about a personal preference, but we chose 2 of the main ones that we talk about and use with our teens. The most go-to and most easiest one to use would be calm breathing. And precisely because our breathing does change when we're anxious. So when we are anxious, we do tend to breathe faster, or we tend to restrict our breathing. Some of us even forget to breathe, which can cause us to feel dizzy, lightheaded, which then actually makes us feel more anxious, because then we worry that something bad is happening. So we encourage our teens to practice breathing in through their nose, pausing, and then take a breath out through their mouth, and pausing several seconds before taking another breath. We do repeat this process until the anxious moment decreases. So it's not just one time that you do it repetitively and repeatedly until you can feel that anxiety decreasing. The other tool that we chose is called muscle relaxation. Simply involves tensing various muscles and then relaxing them. I just wanted to direct you to, and I think it's on your handouts, direct you to the BC website on anxiety. We found most of our tools, most of our presentation and information from there. They have a whole, I don't know how you say, plethora. I don't know why that word came to me, but a lot of tools to choose from. So one of them actually is how to do progressive muscle relaxation. So they take you step by step through it. So if you're interested in it, I would encourage you to look on the website and just have a look at that.
So another tool that's in the anxiety toolbox is challenging scary thoughts. And this strategy involves helping your teen manage her anxiety by replacing the anxious or worried thinking with realistic thinking. It involves learning to see things in a clear, rational way without being overly negative or only focusing on the bad. So Miranda and I have noticed that in our office, the anxious kids that come in are usually negative thinkers. So we can pick out those negative thoughts and really challenge them to give us evidence as to whether that negative thought is really going to occur. We also call it catastrophic thinking. And again, we ask them, well, what's the likelihood that that's going to occur? 80%, usually maybe more like 10%, even lower. So we get the kids to give us evidence that their thoughts are usually irrational, and then we help them replace those irrational, catastrophic thoughts with something that's more realistic. And that does take practice, but the kids really get a hang of it very quickly. And the next thing you know, they are probably picking up our irrational thoughts. So you have to be careful of that. But as any new skill, this does take time and practice to learn and form new thought patterns. And once those catastrophic thoughts are replaced with something a little bit more realistic, then if you think about that anxiety triad again, you've got more realistic thinking, which is going to decrease that anxious or those physical reactions. The cortisol and that adrenaline stops reacting in the brain. The body starts to calm down, which then drives over and affects the child's behavior, which is relaxing a little bit more too, and she's more interested in getting out and doing more things because she's feeling more confident, because she's thinking more confident.
I think the other thing I would just add to challenging scary thoughts as well, Glenda provided an example about a teen that was worried about tripping again in class. And so if you just use that simple example and just even sort of practicing with challenging, like, was that really so bad? So you tripped, so what happened? And so you kind of talk it through saying, well, you survived, you made it out of class, nothing really terrible and catastrophic happened, like the video that we watched, right? A meteor didn't blow up or something like that. So again, it's kind of illustrating to poke a little bit of fun at the anxious thinking, while carefully not poking fun at the child, of course, but kind of looking at the holes in the anxious thought, like, okay, so I'm worried about tripping, but you know what? I didn't hurt myself, and yeah, I didn't feel good at the time, but I made it through. So that would be part of that, challenging your scary thoughts, and through that kind of developing some coping statements, so the child could say, well, you know what, I've been through this before, I can do this again, or it wasn't so bad, this is just my anxious thinking. So those are kind of things that we would use in terms of challenging scary thoughts. Then we talk about facing your fears. So when teens are anxious, they do tend to avoid certain situations or places due to fear. Therefore, it's important that they stop avoiding and escaping. They need to do the things that they're afraid to do. So we often will sit down with the teens, and we would encourage parents to do the same thing with their teen. And usually you would, not usually, but we recommend during a quiet time. So it's not in the midst of a panic attack. It's not in the midst of a really scary situation. It's either before or after, a time when it's quiet and the teen is calm. So you want to make a list of the feared situations or the places, which could, I guess, be maybe riding a bus, maybe ordering food, and placing a phone call. So, and with that list, you want to rate the list. So you could use a simple rating scale. We use a simple one in our office. It's a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being the worst and 1 being piece of cake. So you kind of rate them in terms of the level of difficulty. And then you would start with situations that cause them the least amount of anxiety, and you work your way through the list. The concept behind that is that you want to build the skill and you want to build confidence, so you don't want to start with the toughest one first, because that obviously will be the most difficult and they won't feel confident as they go through it. I always use the example of, if I was going to run a marathon, I wouldn't wake up the next day and just run the marathon. I would train, I would maybe get a good pair of shoes, I would make a plan, I would kind of work my way towards that finality, which would be the marathon. And then with each situation, the child must practice to repeatedly face it until they no longer experience the anxious feelings. And we usually call it like making baby steps. And that would be like pushing, I guess the child can think of it as a way of pushing themselves one notch above their comfort zone. So it's one notch. Once they accomplish that, then they move to the next one. So I think that's the important piece we wanted to share in terms of facing your fears.
Just to add one other thing about facing fears, once the child has been able to accomplish that baby step, it's really important for us as the therapist to make sure that they learn to give themselves rewards and to praise themselves. Usually because they're fairly perfectionistic, they minimize their own successes quite a bit, and they would say, oh, that's nothing, everybody does that. But as we know, everybody's got challenges, and anxiety is this child's a difficulty, and so they really need to praise and feel that they have been successful in that. So some additional tips to help your anxious teen. Just listen to your teen's thoughts and feelings. Simply feeling heard can be very helpful, and avoid trying to solve their problems. Normalize it. It's important to let your teen know that they're not alone. Lots of people have problems with anxiety. And educate. Let your teen know that anxiety is normal, harmless, and it is temporary. We always teach the kids that As anxiety does go up, it also comes down. And we have something that we call the worry hill. And it's, that old roller coaster ride. So as you're going up, your anxiety definitely is going up. And as you are able to manage your anxiety, of course, it's going to come down. Kids often have that belief or that myth that it's going to stay up there, and that's not so. So even in my office, we will do anxiety-provoking situations just for them to realize, oh yeah, the anxiety does go down. So each time as a parent, you have to encourage that information, let them know about that, and watch it come down with them sometimes, and then they get the hang of that.
Some additional tips. We talk about modeling it. So model facing fears and provide encouragement. We encourage parents to motivate teens through supportive coaching. So we often find, and it's again, not laying any blame, but sometimes it's through parents' responses or reactions to certain situations. If they are maybe responding in an anxious, kind of worrisome way, then the child and the teen might start to pick up on some of those things as well. So it becomes, equally important to try to model your own kind of responses to things in terms of anxiety or stress. We do encourage to avoid giving excessive reassurance. We want to instead to encourage our teen to use their coping strategies. We had an excellent question regarding that last night when we were doing this out in Leamington. So what we mean by excessive reassurance, is anything that doesn't seem, or anything that's above normal or average, right? So, I guess one of the questions was, can't we give reassurance anymore? Of course you can, but it's the balance of it. So it's not it's not like you're constantly repeating yourself, it's going to be okay, and like you're doing that night after night after night. So I think that's the piece we wanted to say. So it's really stressing the idea of excessive reassurance. And then praise, as Glenda was saying. Please don't forget to praise your teen's efforts. Remember, facing your fears is not easy, especially since we know now that it's an instinctual response to a perceived danger.
Another helpful tip is to try to reduce stress. Excessive stress and tension in your home, for example, arguing, fighting, too many lessons, scheduling our children, can have a negative effect on families. Look for ways to reduce stress, such as even planning a little bit of fun time for you and the child as much as you can. And keep conflict to a minimum. We do suggest family meetings to discuss and to resolve issues during calm times.
So part of that too does include a routine. We do encourage to try to set specific times for meals, homework, quiet time, and bedtime. We find bedtime can be one of those really kind of hot areas in terms of anxiety. Kids really have a hard time settling. So the most beneficial is when you can set a specific routine and try to stick to it as much as you can. Anxiety does tend to disrupt routines, which can result in meltdowns, which are extremely upsetting for the whole family. Routines do help to establish predictability, which aids in decreasing anxiety. And remember, though, a good routine can take several weeks to practice or to establish, but everyone will feel better once it's in place.
A little bit more about routines. Plan the times for homework and projects. This needs to be part of a regular schedule. Anxious teens tend to put off things and become easily overwhelmed with the task at hand. We find many of the teens come into the office and they report that they procrastinate, they put things off. And some of that has to do with, again, that perfectionism. They're worried about starting it. Is this going to be good enough? And so they just put it off. And then at the last minute, they're staying up all night and probably having the meltdown, and then the whole thing occurs where you as a parent at 11 p.m. are trying to manage the child's anxiety, and she's trying to get her assignment done, and I'm sure most of you know that story. Often the hardest part is getting started. So again, there's where the baby steps come in. We recommend breaking down the tasks into small, manageable steps, maybe setting it up with a calendar, with specific times and places to work, using praise and rewards for each step completed. But, and we know that our kids are very good at this if we let them. Don't get trapped into doing their work.
I'll often use personal examples when I'm trying to explain this to a teen. I think we can often relate to even in our office work in terms of, a project that's due or paperwork that's due or a phone call we have to make or something that's causing us some anxiety. So as colleagues, we often talk about that, and then we might kind of share that with the teens and saying, well, this is what I did when I had to kind of confront this, and these are the steps I took. So it kind of helps illustrate to them there is a way out, and there is a way to manage anxiety. It's very important as well to give consequences. Although your teen may have problems with anxiety, that certainly doesn't give them the green light for inappropriate behavior. It's incredibly important to be held accountable, and I think that's a very good message that we try to share with both teens and with parents. It is important that as parents that you try to set consistent expectations and consistent limits for your teen and follow through on consequences for inappropriate behavior. Parents do need to be on the same page with consequences as much as possible, because as you know, the teens can find a way to kind of get in between the two of you. So it is really helpful to try to be as consistent and kind of agree on something that makes sense for the both of you. It does help increase predictability, and also the consistency as a supportive piece for an anxious teen. We do recommend, if there's changes or if there's things that you're looking at implementing, to discuss that in advance with your teen ahead of time when they're calm. So not in the moment when they're having a meltdown, but when they're calm.
Be supportive. Recognize that it's difficult for your teen to face their fears. I know I've worked with another therapist who explained to me, and it was interesting. He said that when an anxious teen comes into his office, he puts himself in their position with his own set of anxieties, which happen to be walking too close to the edge of a mountain. And of course, he wouldn't fall off, but that fear of him falling off really helped, and remembering his own fear really helped him think about what it's like when we ask our kids to face their fears too. It's important not to laugh at your child or minimize their fears. I've often even caught myself with my own kids saying, "Oh, don't be silly," but that really does then bring shame probably to them and would up even that level of anxiety even more. Rather, let your child know that it's normal to have fears. We're all afraid of something, and that it is possible to boss back the fears. And when we say boss back, that brings to mind another little strategy that we use, which is called externalizing the anxiety, which just means that for the younger kids and even the older kids, we try to get them to imagine what anxiety looks like. And so we call them anxiety pests, which are maybe little beasts jumping around, not really, but if the kids are able to imagine something like that, they've got something to talk back to when it just gets to be overwhelming for them. So, for example, it might sound like if the pests are saying, "Don't go to school today, the kids are going to be laughing at you, it's going to be too hard, you better stay home." Those are the thoughts, remember the triad. Then one of the constructive coping strategies would be to talk back to the beast, which would be saying, "No, I'm going to be taking charge of my day today, and I'm not going to be listening to you right now. I am going to school." So this all goes into externalizing that anxiety, separating the anxiety from the child, and so that she's able or he's able to talk back to the anxiety. Let your teen know that it is important to talk about their fears, and use humor when possible when dealing with the world. We all benefit from finding the humor in things and laughing at life situations.
We also want to encourage independence. Even though it's tempting to do things for your teen when they feel nervous and fearful, we do recommend that you insist on them doing things for themselves. We often say, how else will they learn the skills and abilities to cope with life? This can include giving them responsibilities in the home and in the community. It could be things simple as, emptying the dishwasher or helping to do some grocery shopping. We do recommend brainstorming how to deal with problems or difficult situations. So if a teen comes home and talks about a problem they're having with their teacher, it would be about brainstorming, but kind of encouraging them to come up with some solutions. We want to encourage independence, and this does not mean that you can't be supportive, but it does mean you shouldn't take over or do everything for your child.
And a little bit more on stop giving excessive reassurance. Giving your child excessive reassurance quickly becomes a bottomless pit and keeps the child's anxiety alive. By giving excessive reassurance, you're actually rewarding the anxious behavior. During calm discussion moments, support your child to find ways to reassure themselves and to problem solve independently. For example, I've had a 13-year-old who was really into getting her mom to give her excessive reassurance. So she was not willing, she was so anxious, she wouldn't choose her own clothing for school, she wouldn't do her own hair, she wouldn't decide what to have for breakfast. She had her mom wrapped around her fingers, just making all her decisions for her. Meanwhile, the mom knew she was over-engaged but couldn't get out of it. So when they came into the office, we talked about the baby steps again in getting this girl to very slowly start to pick some of the things, just even what she was going to do for her hair that day. And her anxiety would go up. We'd ask her to measure her anxiety. It might be like an 8 out of 10. But if we then started a little bit easier, well, what socks are you going to wear today? Then she could manage that. You praise the baby steps, and gradually she did get into making a lot more choices for herself. I remember it was around Easter last year, actually, and she actually picked out her own Easter outfit, and everybody was really happy about that, so it was good. Praising the positive behavior, and this will help your child to become independent and confident. And I was just going to say, when this girl could not decide, she would have major meltdowns, screaming, hollering, upsetting her younger brother who was trying to get to his golf lesson. It just really ripped that family, and just very slowly helping her to make those decisions on her own settled the whole family. It's pretty interesting.
I often think of excessive reassurance too. It kind of sometimes presents itself with excessive phone calls. And now in the age of the cell phone, I remember working specifically with one family who the daughter was calling the mother, and I don't know how many times a day. It would seem like a lot of times during the day, just to make sure mom was safe. Where was mom right now? When was she coming home? What was she doing? What was she going to do next? So it was constant questions back and forth. And it was really difficult for the mom, and she was having a really hard time managing that because she was constantly interrupted with phone calls. So that's a really, obvious example of excessive reassurance. So we had to work at minimizing the phone calls. We kind of, broke down the number that she would do during the day, and we broke it down in terms of minimizing it and lessening it. So she got to the point where she stopped calling, and that was excellent. That was a success. But that's another way of how it can present itself in terms of excessive reassurance. So then we've got realistic expectations and taking risks. Your anxious teen may have some trouble meeting expectations. At the same time, anxious teens do need to try new things and take some risks in order to build confidence and develop the necessary skills for dealing with the world. I'll never forget when I first met one of the kids I worked with years ago, and we were talking about the tools for treatment of anxiety, and I was talking about taking risks and exposures to the fear and facing your fears, and she just had this complete blank look on her face and look of dread, thinking, you mean I have to do what I'm afraid of? I'm like, well, yeah, that's exactly what the treatment's all about. So it really helped me understand and appreciate the difficulty of that concept of taking risks, but also talking about that's the only way that you are really going to be able to develop those skills. You can't sit in my office and talk about them. You actually have to do it. It's important that your teen is taking steps forward, even if the steps are small. So breaking goals down into smaller steps are extremely helpful. We encourage our kids to try experiments, such as making a phone call or talking to an unfamiliar classmate or asking a question to a store clerk. So even talking to an unfamiliar classmate, I have a teen that wants to make more friends and meet more people in school. So even just simple things of if she's part of a conversation or kind of privy to one, is just making a comment or just saying, oh, that sounds interesting, or oh, I like that too, and not having to engage much more than that at the very beginning, but it's a way in. So it's kind of building her confidence, and now she's ready to actually ask a question, which would then be the next step in the conversation. And it's also, remember too, that it is important for you to model that brave behavior as well by trying new things too.
Parents' reactions. Although it's important to be understanding and caring, do not overreact or let anxiety trick you into thinking that something is too hard or impossible for your child. Keep things in perspective. Even though it's challenging, it can be done. On the other hand, sometimes we have a hard time understanding our teens' anxiety or why something is so difficult for them. It is common for parents to feel frustrated, angry, and confused with their children, but remember, the problem is the anxiety, not the child. And even though it is anxiety, the behavior still needs to be consequenced, so it does go around in a bit of a circle there.
And then part of parents' reactions too is just really to be aware of your own stress and managing your own stress level. You can't be helpful to your teen if you don't take care of yourself. And we know managing and raising anxious teens can be very draining, as well as it's draining for the child too. So we really stress that. And even with time constraints, we do recommend you try to do some things for yourself, whatever they may do, whatever helps you, I should say, keep a positive perspective. Remember the basics, basically eating well, trying to get enough sleep, exercise, and basically giving yourself permission to take some time off. In addition, try to manage your own reactions and being careful not to pass your fears onto your own teen. I know you brought an example yesterday, but when you said that, I was thinking of my own example, and I realized I started to do this into adulthood. I was raised by a very anxious mom and dad as well, who wouldn't want to admit it, but he was. And I remember that growing up, I was always expected to call home. No matter where I was, they had to know exactly where I was, when I was coming home. If I was on a road trip, I had to call while I was on the road trip. They always had to know where I was. Well, wouldn't you know it? I started to do that too in adulthood. And I actually did that to my parents one time when they went away. I called them and I was like, you didn't call me when you left, and I had no idea where you were. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I sound just like my mom and dad. So it's so slippery how it kind of slips into your life. But I think the more we're aware of it, the more helpful we can be to our teen. And then we try to present a neutral reaction to situations and let your teen know that it's safe to explore things.
And to end things up, we've got a few other healthy tips for teens. Encourage regular physical activity. Even though we hear that kids are feeling tired or exhausted and they may not want to exercise, we know that a little exercise does improve energy levels and reduces stress. Teens need to eat healthy. Anxious teens often forget to eat, or they don't feel hungry, or they may have upset stomachs. They rarely eat a full meal, and it's okay if they graze as long as the snacks cover the basic food groups. Make meals a regular family time as much as possible. And that's it. The last page, I think, it's just about the references that we used, and again, it was anxietybc.com, and we used Maureen Wagner material, Worried No More. The next couple of pages are just resources that you can use in Windsor. There's phone numbers and agencies and crisis service numbers and helplines, okay?